Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 2022 film The Twin. It's a Shudder exclusive and it's coming to Shudder on Friday, May 6th. Now, usually they're releasing on Thursdays, but this is a Friday release. And part of the reason for that being apparently this is also being released in theaters at the same time. It's probably limited, I'm assuming not wide release, but I don't know. I was pretty surprised with that. Anyway, The Twin is directed by Taneli Mustonen, who also did films Ella and Friends, Reunion, Reunion 2, The Bachelor Party, The Renovation, and probably the one people would know him for, Lake Bottom. Haven't seen that one. I think it might still be on Shudder, and I've been meaning to check it out. At some point, I'll get there. The script was written by Mustonen as well as Aleksi Hyvarinen. Sorry if I really butchered that name. I tried. And Hyvarinen had also written scripts for Ella and Friends, The Renovation, and Lake Bottom. This is a Finnish film, but it's in English, so no subtitles for people who aren't subtitle fans. Synopsis, quick synopsis. So it's basically about a family, a mother, father, and kid who there's as the title says, a twin to the child, and something tragic happens in the beginning. I'm just going to tell you that just because it happens immediately. So something tragic happens in the beginning, and they kind of move away to a new house, new location, pretty secluded, to try and start a new life, work through some things. So it's very heavily about loss and trauma, very heavily. So it's very well-trodden ground. So for that reason, I come into these types of films kind of like, you really need to give me something new or execute it in a really good way. And so I think that this one didn't give a whole lot new, but I do think that it kind of like picked pieces from a bunch of different films that I see as pretty clear influences on it that you might not necessarily associate with one another. And it made something pretty solid in my opinion. So I would recommend checking this out. As I continue to talk about it though, just know this is no spoilers since this review is going out before it's in theaters and on Shudder, so you can watch this and not have anything spoiled for you. Except that very first scene, but it's like immediate in the film. Lots of nice sweeping camera shots to open up the film, and that actually continues. One of the biggest things with this film is it really looks wonderful. The directing, cinematography, excellent. The camera work is so engaging. Like there's a lot of like smooth, interesting camera movements within the film, and shots are framed really, really well. So it's got a great look. Another one of the big things I like to harp on with films is lighting. If you have darker scenes, making sure that it's lit properly so that people can still see what they're trying to look at. This film did it just fine. They did a nice job with it, so kudos on that. Kudos on just overall visuals. Quite nice. I do have some issues with the film, but overall I think it was pretty solid. The pre-title sequence is a little bit over dramatized in my estimation. That's just, my personal thing. There may be people who don't find it a little over dramatized, and I actually think that there are a bunch of moments within the film that kind of become overly dramatized. And I think a lot of that ends up being driven by the score. Now, the score, actual composition of the music, I think is quite good. It sounds very good. The problem is the way that it's incorporated. I'm not a fan of the filmmakers basically yelling at me with their music, and that's what it feels like at times. Like you're being screamed at to feel a certain way in certain scenes, and we don't need that. I'm all for much more restrained soundtracks with films, and this film does the opposite for the most part. Although they had a great use of silence at one point, and I'll talk about that when I get towards the end. Although I'm not going to give anything away, but just to give you an idea of about where it is in the film, just so you can look out for it. The story early on feels like it's well-trodden material, like so much so that it really needs to vastly be different in order to really pull me in. That's kind of how I was feeling from the beginning. The beginning, it's very much like I've seen so many horror films that start this way. So many horror films that start this way. So it kind of makes you start to feel like, do I want to continue? Am I wasting my time? But I'd say go ahead and stick with it because they do enough kind of, I don't want to say different. Like everything I saw in this isn't different. Like, it's been done in other films before, but it's kind of how they picked the pieces out of those other films of inspiration and put them together that I enjoyed. So it kind of made its own film out of pieces of other films. So if that bothers you, if you can like clearly see influences from other films, then it might bother you with this film. But for me, as long as it's, you know, executed in a good way, which I think it is in this film, I'm okay. It looks quite good, like I said, great camera work, great shot framing. There are some particularly beautifully shot dream sequences in this film. And that just goes to what I was saying is, from a technical standpoint, they did a wonderful job with this film. The dream sequences in particular, I was watching and was just like, that's beautiful. It's just beautiful. So really good job there. The chemistry between the parental characters in this is lacking, in my opinion. Now, there may be a reason behind that, but I think that it plays too oddly, in my opinion, for the film. And it's one of those things where, like, you can start with a different relationship with them and then kind of, like, you know, change it over time. But it starts a certain way and stays that way. And like I said, it may be intentional, but the way it comes across to me, how it's received from this audience member, is it sounds like the two actors are just delivering lines to each other. They're not actually actively engaged in a conversation, if that makes any sense to anyone. Like, it legitimately feels like they're talking at each other and they're not talking in an actual conversation. Now, once again, like I was saying, that might be intentional because they might be trying to show that, you know, both of them are talking and neither is listening. So, like, I understand that. But the way it sounds and the way it's done just seems more like actors delivering lines. So I wasn't a big fan of that. With the town and how the townsfolk are in this film, this, you know, the new location that the parents and kid go to, I get the vibes from a very particular few films in the folk horror subgenre of horror. So I'm not going to say anything further than that, but if people are familiar enough with folk horror and you've seen some key or certain folk horror films, you may feel the same. I'm just going to leave it there. There is an air of unreliable narrator within this. It is one of those films that kind of brings things into question, so you do stay relatively confused about which way the film is ultimately going to go. You know, you have your main narrator. It's the wife who, the mother who is the primary character in this, who you're following around. And they introduce things where they're kind of like, well, is this just perspective or is this what's actually happening? So it does keep you guessing for a decent amount of time from that perspective, and I like that. Like, I think they integrated that pretty well. That said, I did pick up on a few key things that I'm not going to say ruined the twist ending, because there is a twist ending to it. It didn't ruin the twist ending for me because I thought they did it pretty well. It's just, I saw a bunch of stuff coming that they ended up explaining at the end of the film, being like, oh, you know, this is what's at play here. And here's your big twist. Like, I was like, okay, saw this coming. I didn't see everything coming, so that's good, because there are a bunch of aspects to the twist, so I like that. But there may be some people who watch this and are just like, I know where this is going, because there are a few things kind of pointing to it. But there may be plenty of other people who watch it in a different light and they don't see that coming, and the twist has even more impact. One of the things you need to understand is, when I'm doing these reviews, I'm watching the film in a very different way than I normally would if I was just watching it for pleasure. I have more of, like, kind of my brain turned off, and I'm not thinking ahead as much when I'm watching it, just, you know, just for fun. So when I'm watching it in this sense, like, I'm being more analytical. I'm looking at it from a more critical standpoint. So for that reason, I just happen to pick up on more stuff and kind of be able to see where things may end up going. So just so you know. There's also a pretty good atmosphere of paranoia that gets created in this film, which I enjoyed. And it also gets maintained relatively well. So I like that paranoia aspect. About 45 minutes into the film, there's a conversation with a character that I'm really not sure should have happened. I mean, the conversation could have happened, but I just think that everything that is said doesn't need to be said and probably should not be said at this point. It should be more of like a show the audience instead of having this character actually saying it. So, but, excuse me, but the events that came after that end up kind of softening the issue with that for me. So it ended up being not as big of a deal. But at the time, I was kind of like, why are we calling this out so explicitly? Like, can't we just see what's going on? Or kind of like, I don't know. But yeah, it just kind of, it bothered me at the time, but it's not that big of a deal. There is a decent twist, like I said, and I did see a lot of it coming, but I didn't see all of it coming. And like I said, it's done in a pretty good way. So I think plenty of people, having sat through the film, will be pretty happy with the twist ending. I mean, if it wasn't as well done at the end as it was, I would have wanted to rate this much lower, because one of my biggest issues with this film is the pacing is not great. Now, that's a personal thing. Obviously, everything in these reviews are personal things for me, because it's my perspective totally. But here's the thing. It's almost an hour and 50 minutes. It's like an hour and 48 minutes with credits. It does not need that time. There are a lot of places where it could have and should have been tightened up, in my opinion, because the pacing does suffer with this film. Now, ultimately, it's a good film, but I just think you could make it an even better film if you really edit things down and make it more tight. Because one of the big issues has been editing. I mean, it's very rare, in my opinion, that I see a new film coming out for these screeners that I don't see places where they could have cut it down. And I think part of the problem is two things. One, they try and go to a certain runtime when they don't have enough story. With this one, I think it's probably not so much that, and more it looks so good, and the filmmaker's vision was so big that they felt like they personally wanted extra in there, when if they could have stepped back and looked a little bit more from a viewer's standpoint, there is some stuff that I think they think is really important and that they really wanted for, building characters and building atmosphere and everything like that, that really isn't needed and actually just kind of drags the film down a little bit. So, just saying. There's a part within the last 10 minutes where they use silence, and it's very good impact. It's done for the impact of emotion of a certain type. I'm not going to say what type of emotion, but I'm a big fan of the use of silence in films, because you can get so much out of it. You can allow your audience members to feel and think more, and kind of just be stuck with themselves in that moment. And that's what this particular moment does in the film. And I think that's probably my favorite part of the film. I thought that was executed extremely well. And that's good, because that was a key moment within the film. So good on that. I want to call out one particular performance in this. The character of Helen is played by Barbara Martin, and I thought she did an exceptional job. She was my favorite character in the film. She was my favorite actor in this film. I thought she nailed it. I would like to see even more from her. She's been acting since the 80s, so she's done plenty of stuff. It's just I want more from her. Like, keep it going. She did an excellent job. Again, not great pacing. This deals heavily in trauma and how that drives kind of anxieties about what's left in someone's life, and how people end up trying to deal with it, either deal with it or not deal with it, and the side effects and all that stuff. Think about the stuff that you hear about and see in horror having to do with trauma and loss. Like, it's all those trappings are there, and it's executed pretty well. So, out of 5 stars with half stars in play, I'm gonna go 3.5 stars, which is a pretty good rating for me. I was between 3 and 3.5, and between how good it looks and how they did with the actual final portion of the film, I'm bumping it to the 3.5. So I recommend, but I would like to hear other people's opinions, especially if it's a opinion that conflicts with mine. Because I'm always interested in hearing maybe what I missed or what other people's perspectives are in films. So go ahead and put it in the comments. But whatever, if you liked it, if you hated it, if you're in between. And don't just say liked it, hated it, whatever. Give me like a sentence or two letting me know what you did or did not like about the film. Because I will ask you, if you just leave a comment that's basically like, I hated it, I didn't like it, or I liked it, I loved it, I will ask you. I will reply to your comment and ask you to go into detail. So head it off at the pass. Just put it in there. But anyway, do me a quick favor, hit subscribe if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet. I really do appreciate that. It is quick and painless for you. It costs you no money, and it really does mean a lot to me as I try and kind of grow this nerdy horror community here. So I would appreciate it. Also hit the notification bell button, because then you'll know when I'm putting up my new videos, and I'm doing 4 a week at this point, which I think is a good amount. But regardless, I really thank you for taking your time to watch this particular video. It does mean a lot to me. And until next time, keep it brutal.